They mistook her silence for stupidity, as my sister-in-law raised a glass of vintage wine to mock my daughter as a slow burden before Boston's elite. She had no idea I was clutching a letter from MIT in my purse. That letter was not just a ticket to the future, but a death sentence for their arrogance. Do you want to see their smug faces turn ghost white? Sit down. I am going to tell you everything. My name is Mildred Hightower. I am 36 years old. And if you looked at my tax returns, you would see me listed as a freelance software engineer. That is the sanitized version of the truth. The reality is that I trade sleep for flexibility, piecing together code for a small, scrappy outfit called Nebula Data Corp, so that I can be present for the moments that actually matter. I work from a cramped corner desk in our living room, surrounded by the hum of hard drives and the scent of lemon furniture polish, trying to keep a roof over our heads without selling my soul to the corporate grind that consumed my late husband. David used to say that I had a spine made of titanium, but lately, I feel more like I am made of glass transparent, fragile, and constantly waiting for the shatter. The center of my universe is a 12-year-old girl named Penny. If you met her on the street, you might think she was rude. If you met her in a classroom, you might agree with the misguided teachers who label her as slow. Penny has auditory processing disorder, coupled with selective mutism that flares up like a sudden fever whenever the world gets too loud or too demanding. Her brain does not filter sound the way yours or mine does. To Penny, the hum of a refrigerator, the honk of a car, and the voice of a person asking a question all arrive at the same volume, a chaotic wall of noise that she has to manually sort through. It takes her time. She is not buffering because her processor is slow. She is buffering because her resolution is too high. We live in the shadow of David's family, the Vanderbilts. They are not the Vanderbilts of history books and railroad empires, though they would very much like you to believe they are distant cousins. They are the Boston Vanderbilts of old money pretensions and new money anxieties. Since David died 4 years ago, my connection to them has been a frayed rope that I'm terrified to cut. Mostly for Penny's sake, or so I tell myself. The sharpest thorn in my side is my sister-in-law, Candace. Candace is a woman who treats motherhood like a competitive sport, and life like a beauty pageant where the judges are always watching. She lives in a house that looks like a museum and treats her son, Austin, like the prize exhibit. Austin is 12, just like Penny. But where Penny is silence and depth, Austin is noise and shine. He is their math prodigy, the golden boy who brings home report cards stamped with straight A's and medals that Candace polishes more often than she hugs him. The tension usually comes to a head at the mandatory Sunday luncheons. Last week was no exception. The air in the Vanderbilt dining room was always 5 degrees too cold, chilled to preserve the floral arrangements and the stiff hairstyles of the guests. We were seated at the mahogany table, the kind that requires coasters for your coasters. Candace was holding court, wearing a pastel suit that likely cost more than my car, talking about Austin's acceptance into an advanced pre-algebra summer intensive. "It is just innate," Candace said, gesturing with a fork that gleamed under the chandelier. "Austin simply sees the numbers. It is a gift. Not everyone has it. Of course." Her eyes slid over to Penny. My daughter was wearing her noise-canceling headphones around her neck, her security blanket, and was focused intently on the peas on her plate. Arranging them into a binary pattern, she knew the rules: do not wear the headphones at the table, but keep them close. "Penny, darling," Candace said, her voice dropping into that saccharine register she reserved for children and pets. "Did you manage to finish that book I sent over, the picture book about the little train?" It was a book for 5-year-olds. Candace knew Penny was reading college-level technical manuals, or at least looking at them, but she preferred this narrative. Penny looked up. Her eyes were dark and intelligent, but her face was a mask of neutrality. She began to process the sound, separating Candace's voice from the clink of cutlery and the ticking of the grandfather clock. "Well," Candace pressed, not waiting 2 seconds. "It is a simple question, sweetie, yes or no?" Penny's mouth opened slightly. She was finding the word, The signal was traveling from her brain to her vocal cords, but the pressure from Candace's stare acted like a jammer. The silence stretched for 5 seconds, 7 seconds, 10. Austin, sitting opposite us, let out a snort. He kicked his legs under the table, looking bored and arrogant. "She does not know, Mom. She is doing that thing again," Candace sighed. A dramatic exhale that ruffled her silk blouse. She turned to the rest of the table, her parents, David's stern-faced mother and father, and offered a sympathetic, tragic smile. "Poor thing," Candace said, loud enough for the servants in the kitchen to hear. "She is glitching again. It must be so hard for you, Mildred, having to manage a child who is just perpetually buffered." My hand tightened around my water glass. I gripped it so hard, I thought the crystal might snap and slice my palm open. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that Penny had a higher IQ than everyone at this table combined. I wanted to tell her that while Austin was memorizing multiplication tables, Penny was understanding the logic gates that built the modern world, but I said nothing. I swallowed the rage, just like I swallowed the dry roast beef. I did it for David. I did it because they paid for Penny's private school tuition, the one specialized environment that promised to help her. Even though they were currently failing miserably. "She is just thinking, Candace," I said, my voice steady but low. "Of course." Candace dismissed me with a wave of her manicured hand. "Thinking, that is what we are calling it today." Penny looked down at her plate. She did not cry. She never cried in front of them. She simply reached into her pocket, pulled out her small notepad, and wrote a single word. "Fine." She slid it toward Candace. Candace laughed. A tinkling, hollow sound. "Oh, handwriting. How quaint. At least she can spell 3-letter words. We should celebrate the small victories, I suppose." The drive home was silent. Penny put her headphones on the moment we stepped out of that mausoleum of a house. I watched her in the rearview mirror. Her face bathed in the soft blue light of the passing street lamps. She looked small, defeated. My heart broke for the 1,000th time, a fracture that was becoming structural. But I knew something the Vanderbilts did not. I knew what happened when the sun went down. We arrived at our modest 2-story house, a place that felt warm and lived in, unlike the cold perfection we had just left. Penny went straight to her room to change into her pajamas, an oversized t-shirt with a pixelated cat on it. I went to the kitchen to make tea, waiting for the transformation. It usually started around 10 o'clock at night. I crept down the basement stairs. This was not a typical basement filled with old holiday decorations and damp cardboard boxes. One corner of this underground space had been transformed. It was Penny's sanctuary. It looked like the cockpit of a spaceship built from scrap parts. There were 3 monitors mounted on a custom frame made of PVC pipes. A tangle of black and red wires ran along the walls like technological vines, connecting to a server rack that hummed with a low, powerful vibration. This was not a toy. This was a beast of a machine that Penny had built herself. Scavenging parts from the discarded electronics dump behind the local tech park, and using the allowance I gave her to buy cooling fans online. Penny sat in the center of it all in a battered ergonomic chair. She was no longer the shrinking, silent girl at the dining table. Her posture was erect, commanding. Her fingers flew across a mechanical keyboard, the clicking sound rapid and rhythmic, like heavy rain on a tin roof. On the screens, lines of code cascaded like waterfalls. Green, blue, white text scrolling faster than the human eye could naturally follow. She was not just typing, she was conducting. I stood in the shadows of the doorway, holding my mug of tea, just watching her. This was the paradox of my daughter. The world saw a girl who could not answer a simple question about a picture book. I saw a mind that spoke the language of machines fluently, a mind that found comfort in the absolute logic of algorithms where there was no sarcasm, no hidden meanings, and no cruelty. She paused for a moment, hitting the enter key with a flourish. A progress bar on the center screen filled up instantly to 100%. She spun her chair around and saw me. A genuine smile, rare and beautiful, broke across her face. She did not speak. She tapped her chest, then pointed to the screen. "Done," she mouthed. I walked over and kissed the top of her head, smelling shampoo and ozone. "You are brilliant. You know that," I whispered. She shrugged, turning back to her domain. To her, this wasn't brilliance, it was just breathing. The next morning, the illusion of our separate peace was shattered by the arrival of the mail. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope with the Vanderbilt family crest embossed in gold leaf on the flap. I knew what it was before I opened it. Every year, the family held a gala. Usually, it was just an excuse to drink expensive champagne and tax-deduct their lifestyle. But this year was different. I ripped it open. The calligraphy was elegant and sharp. The Vanderbilt family invites you to the annual spring gala. This year, we are proud to announce the inauguration of the Vanderbilt Future Leaders Scholarship Fund. A formal announcement of the first recipient will be made at 8 o'clock in the evening. I felt a pit form in my stomach. The Future Leaders Scholarship. It was an open secret. A charade. The fund was worth $5 million, designed to support a young prodigy through their entire academic career, providing seed money for startups, research grants, and entry into the highest social circles, and everyone knew exactly who the first recipient was going to be. It wasn't a competition, it was a coronation. Candace had been lobbying for this for 2 years, positioning Austin as the heir apparent to the family's intellectual legacy. The gala was just the stage for her to place the crown on his head while the rest of us applauded. I looked at Penny, who was eating toast and reading a textbook on cryptography. They wanted us there, not because they wanted our company, but because every queen needs an audience, and every golden boy needs a foil. They wanted Penny there to look slow and awkward in the corner, making Austin shine even brighter by comparison. I tossed the invitation onto the counter. It landed with a heavy thud. "We are going," I said to the empty kitchen, a fierce protectiveness rising in my throat like bile. "We are going, and we are going to survive it." Little did I know. Survival was about to become the least of our concerns. The game was rigged. Yes, but they had forgotten that when you push a genius into the shadows, they learn to see in the dark, and they learn to build things that can bring the whole house down. The phone on the kitchen counter did not just ring. It screamed. It was the specific, shrill ringtone I had assigned to Candace, a sound that triggered an immediate spike in my cortisol levels. It was barely 9 o'clock in the morning, 2 days after the invitation had arrived, and I knew exactly what this conversation was going to be. It was not a courtesy call. It was a perimeter check. I slid my finger across the screen and put it on speaker, continuing to chop carrots for Penny's lunch with a little more force than necessary. "Mildred, darling," Candace's voice filled the small kitchen. It was smooth, polished, and dripping with that distinct brand of East Coast condescension that sounds like concern but feels like a slap. I was just going over the seating chart for the gala, and I had a thought, a little worry. Actually, I stopped chopping. "Good morning. Candace, what sort of worry?" "Well," she paused, likely for dramatic effect, "I was thinking about Penny. You know how she gets in crowds. The noise, the lights, the sheer volume of people. It is going to be incredibly overstimulating. We have over 200 guests coming, including the senator. I would hate for the poor thing to have one of her episodes. It would be distressing for her, and quite frankly, awkward for everyone else." I gripped the handle of the knife. There it was, the sugar-coated eviction notice. She did not care about Penny's comfort. She cared about the optics. She wanted a perfect, blemish-free tableau of the Vanderbilt dynasty, and a 12-year-old girl with noise-canceling headphones and a tablet did not fit the aesthetic of her master race narrative. "Penny is fine with crowds as long as she has her coping mechanisms," I said, my voice steady. "She is looking forward to it. We both are." "Are you sure?" Candace pressed, the sweetness curdling slightly. "I mean, really, Mildred, think about it. Austin is going to be giving a speech. There will be press. If Penny starts making those noises she makes, or if she just sits there looking vacant, well, people talk. I'm just trying to protect her dignity. And yours?" My daughter's dignity is intact. Candace, I cut her off. She is a Vanderbilt by blood. Same as Austin. We will be there. And do not worry about the seating chart. Put us near the back if it makes you feel better. But we are coming. There was a silence on the other end, cold and sharp. I could practically hear her jaw tightening. Fine, Candace snapped, dropping the facade. Just make sure she is medicated or pacified. This is a big night for Austin. I will not have it ruined by a scene. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, feeling the familiar burn of humiliation in my chest, but I did not have time to dwell on it. I had to get Penny to school. The drive to the Hawthorne Academy was usually our quiet time, but today the silence felt heavy. Hawthorne was one of those institutions that prided itself on tradition, which was usually code for exclusion. It was a fortress of red brick and ivy, costing $40,000 a year, a tuition entirely covered by the Vanderbilt estate. That financial tether was the only reason Penny was there. And it was a leash that they tugged on whenever they pleased. I walked Penny to the entrance, watching her merge into the stream of uniforms. She looked small, her backpack weighing her down, her eyes scanning the ground to avoid eye contact. I will pick you up at 3, I promised. She gave me a small nod and disappeared inside. I barely made it back to my car before my phone rang again. This time, it was the school office. Mrs. Albright, the vice principal. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a leather chair in an office that smelled of old paper and furniture polish. Facing Mrs. Albright and Penny's homeroom teacher, Mr. Henderson. We are concerned, Mrs. Hightower, Mr. Henderson began, clasping his hands on the desk. He was a young man who mistook his lack of patience for academic rigor. Penny is simply not present. I asked her a direct question about the history of the Civil War today during the first period, and she just stared at me. It took her a full minute to even acknowledge I was speaking. It disrupts the flow of the class. I have explained this, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Penny has auditory processing disorder. She hears you, but her brain takes longer to decode the syntax. She is not ignoring you. She is translating you. If you let her write the answer, she will get it right every time. Mrs. Albright sighed, adjusting her glasses. She pointed to a file on her desk. We have looked at her test scores. Mildred, yes, she passes. But we feel the environment here is too fast-paced for a child with her limitations. The Hawthorne Academy is an incubator for leaders. We need engagement. We need debate. Penny is a ghost in the classroom. She gets straight A's on written exams, I argued. She understands the material better than half the class. It is not just about the grades, Mrs. Albright said, her eyes drifting to a plaque on the wall behind me. I turned to look. It was a brass plate listing the platinum donors for the new science wing. The name Vanderbilt was at the very top, etched in the largest font. Mrs. Albright turned back to me, her expression hardening. We have spoken to Mrs. Candace Vanderbilt about this as well. She agrees that perhaps a special education facility would be more appropriate for Penny's speed. We are not expelling her. Of course, we would never do that to the family, but we strongly suggest you look at other options for next semester. For her own good. For her own good. The same phrase Candace used. It was the weaponized compassion of the elite. They wanted to discard my daughter, but they wanted to feel benevolent while doing it. I walked out of that office shaking with rage. I wanted to burn the building down. I wanted to scream that their incubator for leaders was actually a factory for narcissists. I waited in the parking lot until the bell rang. When the doors opened, I saw the flood of students, and then I saw the dynamic that the teachers conveniently ignored. Austin was standing near the pickup zone, surrounded by a group of sycophants. He looked every bit the miniature corporate shark he was being raised to be. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his hair gelled back. He was laughing loudly. Holding court, I saw Penny walking toward me, head down. She had to pass by Austin's group. Austin stepped out, blocking her path. He was smiling, but it was a shark's grin. I rolled down my window, straining to hear, ready to jump out of the car. "Hey, dumb one," Austin said. He didn't shout. He said it with a casual cruelty that suggested he used the name often. "My mom said you are coming to the party on Saturday. Try not to drool on the carpet. Okay, it is Persian. It costs more than your house." The boys around him snickered. Penny stopped. She adjusted her headphones, her face blank. "My mom says you are a biological error," Austin continued, leaning in closer. "Like a glitch in a video game that they forgot to patch out. That is why you can't talk right, because you are broken." Penny looked up at him. For a second, I saw something flash in her eyes. It was not fear. It was not sadness. It was the cold, analytical look of a scientist observing a lab rat. She stepped around him and kept walking. Austin laughed, shouting after her, "Run away. Mute. Go type a blog about it." When she got into the car, she was calm, too calm. "Did you hear him?" I asked, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Penny pulled out her tablet and typed, "He is irrelevant. He is a bully," I said. "And the school thinks he is a genius." Penny typed again. "He cheated on his calculus midterm. He paid a senior $50 to take a picture of the answer key." I stared at her. "How do you know that?" She shrugged, then tapped the screen to open a new window. She turned the tablet toward me. It was a wall of code, complex, dense, and incomprehensible to me. But at the bottom, there was a simple dialog box, "System vulnerability patched. Admin access reset." "What is this?" I asked. Penny took the tablet back and typed rapidly. "The school website. Their security is a joke. Anyone could have hacked into the student database and stolen social security numbers. I found a backdoor in the SQL database. I fixed it. I looked at my 12-year-old daughter. The teachers called her slow. Her cousin called her a glitch. And she had just quietly saved the institution that despised her from a catastrophic data breach." "Did you tell them?" I asked. "Did you send this to the IT department?" She shook her head violently. "No, they would not believe me. They would say I broke it." She was right. If Mildred Hightower's silent daughter walked into the office and said she fixed their server, they would accuse her of cyber vandalism. They would expel her. "You are incredible," I whispered. "You are so much better than them." "Penny." She looked out the window, watching the city blur by. We were driving through the wealthy district of Boston, past brownstones that cost $5 million and boutiques that sold handbags for the price of a car. We were surrounded by wealth and power, yet we were completely, utterly alone. The isolation felt physical, like a glass wall separating us from the rest of the human race. We were the anomalies, the glitch in their perfect system. We arrived home as the sun was beginning to set, casting long orange shadows across our small lawn. I parked the car and we walked toward the front door. That was when I saw it. A car was parked across the street, idling. It was not one of our neighbors' cars. It was a long, sleek black sedan, the kind of vehicle that screams government or high-end corporate security. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like obsidian. There was no license plate on the front bumper. I froze, my hand instinctively going to Penny's shoulder. "Go inside," I said quietly. "Who is it?" Penny signed. "I do not know. Just go." Penny unlocked the door and slipped inside. I stayed on the porch, watching the car. For a moment, nothing happened. The engine purred with a low, menacing rumble. I felt a gaze on me, heavy and assessing. From behind that tinted glass, was it Candace? Had she sent someone to intimidate us? No. This was too subtle for Candace. Candace would have sent a lawyer or a flashy sports car. This was professional. This was serious. I took a step toward the street, my heart hammering against my ribs. As soon as I moved, the car's engine revved. It did not peel out with screeching tires. It simply accelerated with a terrifying, controlled speed, vanishing around the corner in 3 seconds flat. I stood there on the porch, shivering in the evening chill. The street was empty again, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I did not know it then. But that car was the first crack in the dam. The water was rising, and the flood was coming. I went inside and locked the deadbolt. Saturday was 2 days away. I had to get my armor ready, and I had to make sure Penny's armor was bulletproof, because we were walking into the lion's den, and the lions were hungry. The timeline was compressing. We were exactly 3 days away from the Saturday night gala, and the air in our house felt pressurized, like the moments before a thunderstorm breaks. The incident with the black sedan had left me edgy. I found myself checking the window blinds every 20 minutes, expecting to see men in suits or perhaps a process server sent by Candace to file for custody or some other legal nightmare. It was just past 10 in the morning when the doorbell rang. It was not the cheerful chime of a neighbor. It was a single, authoritative buzz that demanded attention. I froze in the hallway, clutching a basket of laundry. Penny was in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the rug, disassembling an old toaster she had rescued from the recycling bin. She looked up. Her screwdriver paused in midair. I moved to the door and peered through the peephole. It was not the black sedan. It was a courier, dressed in a uniform I did not recognize, holding a flat, rigid scanner. He looked impatient. I opened the door just a crack, keeping the chain engaged. "Yes. Delivery for Ms. Penelope Hightower," the man said. He did not ask if she lived there. He stated it as a fact. "I am her mother," I said, eyeing the package in his hand. It was a thick, slate-gray envelope, reinforced with cardboard. It looked official. It looked legal. My stomach dropped. Had Candace actually done it? Had she sent legal papers to a 12-year-old? "Need a signature," he said, shoving the scanner through the gap. I unhooked the chain, signed with a trembling hand, and took the envelope. It was heavier than it looked. The return address was not a law firm. It was a P.O. box in Cambridge, Massachusetts. There was a red stamp on the front, confidential. Hand deliver only. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. Penny had abandoned the toaster and was standing in the hallway, wiping grease from her hands onto her jeans. "Did you order something?" I asked, my voice tight. Penny shook her head. She stared at the gray envelope with an intensity that made me nervous. She knew what it was. I could see the recognition in her eyes, buried under layers of caution. "Penny, what is this?" She stepped forward, her small hand reaching out. She did not take the envelope. Instead, she gently pushed my hand, the one holding the package, toward my chest. She raised her hands and signed, her movements fluid and precise. "You open it. Me Wyatt is addressed to you. You need to see." She signed. I walked into the kitchen and grabbed the letter opener. My hands were shaking so badly I almost tore the contents inside. I sliced through the heavy paper and pulled out a stack of documents. The first thing I saw was the letterhead. It was embossed in crimson and gray. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology. My breath hitched. My T. I looked at Penny. She was standing perfectly still, watching my face. I began to read. This was not a generic form letter. It was personally addressed to Ms. Hightower. "Dear Ms. Hightower, regarding solution to the Falcon Matrix Challenge, on behalf of the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, it is my distinct privilege to contact you. 6 months ago, our cryptography division released the Falcon Matrix, a polymorphic encryption algorithm designed to test the limits of current quantum decryption models. We offered a standing invitation for any doctoral candidate or industry professional to find a vulnerability in the sequence. On Monday night, our servers logged a successful breach of the Falcon protocol. The solution was elegant, unprecedented, and executed with a computational efficiency we have not seen in 2 decades. The user signature was traced to your IP address under the handle Silent Coder. I stopped reading. The room seemed to tilt. I looked at the date. Monday night. That was the night Penny had shown me the progress bar. The night she had smiled. "The Falcon Matrix?" I whispered. "Penny, you solved a problem that MIT professors created." She nodded. A small, shy shrug of her shoulders. I went back to the letter. We understand from our preliminary background trace that you are currently not affiliated with any university. We initially assumed you were a senior researcher operating privately. However, further verification suggests a more unique situation. Regardless of your current academic standing, the solution speaks for itself. We are formally extending an offer for you to join Project Aletheia as a junior research fellow, effective immediately. This position includes a full scholarship for early undergraduate placement, a research stipend of $50,000 per annum, and access to our dedicated AI laboratory. I dropped the letter. It fluttered to the floor. Landing next to the toaster parts. $50,000. Full scholarship. Research fellow. They think you are an adult, I managed to say, my voice cracking. They think you are a professional researcher. Penny moved then. She walked over to the kitchen table where her tablet was charging. She unplugged it, tapped the screen a few times, and held it up for me to see. It was an email draft she had started but never sent. To MIT, admissions from Silent Coder. Subject Re-Falcon Matrix. I am not a researcher. I am 12. I like patterns. Your matrix had a rhythm error in the third quadrant. It was like listening to a song with a missing beat. I just fixed the beat. I stared at the words. A rhythm error. To the greatest minds in the country. It was an unsolvable wall of math. To my daughter, it was just bad music she had to tune. The tears came then. They were not the polite, silent tears I shed in the bathroom so she would not hear. They were great, heaving sobs that racked my entire body. I sank onto the kitchen chair, burying my face in my hands, all the years of fighting the school board, all the nights worrying about her future, all the insults from Candace. The pitying looks from the neighbors, it all came crashing down under the weight of this vindication. They called you dumb, I choked out, grabbing her hand and pulling her close. They called you slow, and you just outsmarted the smartest people in the world. Penny did not cry. She stood beside me, her small hand resting on my shoulder, steady and grounding. She waited until my sobbing subsided into sniffles. Then she took the tablet back and typed again. They say I cannot speak, so I let the numbers speak for me. I looked at that sentence, glowing in the soft light of the screen. It was the most profound thing I had ever read. We have to tell them, I said, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. The fierce energy of revenge was starting to burn through the sadness. I am going to call Candace right now. I am going to call the school. I am going to paste this letter on a billboard outside the Vanderbilt estate. I reached for my phone. Penny's hand shot out and clamped over my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. I looked at her. What, Penny? We have to. This proves everything. She shook her head slowly. Her eyes were hard, calculating, the same look she had given Austin in the parking lot. She tapped her lips with one finger, the universal sign for silence. Then she picked up the tablet. No phone calls. Not yet. If you tell them now, Candace will spin it. She will say she helped me, or she will say I cheated, or she will try to control it. I paused. She was right. Candace would find a way to make this about her benevolence. Oh, we always knew she had potential. We just had to push her. Then what do we do? I asked. Penny smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was a Vanderbilt smile. Sharp and dangerous. The gala. She typed. They want to show off Austin. They want to show how smart he is. Let them. I understood. She did not just want to be acknowledged. She wanted to strike when the stage was biggest. She wanted to let them build their tower of lies as high as possible before she pulled the foundational brick. You want to do it at the party, I said. She nodded. It will be brutal, I warned her. If we walk in there with this, we are declaring war. They started the war. She typed, I am just finishing the code. A shiver went down my spine. My little girl was not just a genius. She was a tactician. Okay, I said, taking a deep breath. Okay, we do it your way. Operation Silence. I stood up. The grief and exhaustion were gone, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. I looked at the gray envelope on the floor. I picked it up and slid it carefully into my purse, the one I would carry to the gala. "If we are going to do this," I said, looking at Penny, "we are not going in there looking like the poor relations they think we are. You cannot accept a fellowship from MIT wearing a hand-me-down dress." Penny looked down at her stained jeans and raised an eyebrow. "Get your shoes," I commanded. "We are going shopping, and we are not going to the discount outlet." We drove to Newberry Street. I had a savings account that I had been building for emergencies: a broken boiler, a car repair, medical bills. It had $2,000 in it. I decided right then and there that this was an emergency, or rather, it was an investment. We walked into a boutique that usually intimidated me. The salesgirl looked at us with skepticism, her eyes flicking over my worn sneakers. "Can I help you find something sale?" she asked, her tone suggesting the sale rack was in the alley. "No," I said, standing taller than I had in years. "My daughter needs a gown, something architectural, something that looks like the future." The salesgirl blinked, surprised by the authority in my voice. "Right this way." Penny hated trying on clothes, but today she was different. She treated it like a mission. We rejected the frills, the pinks, the bows. We rejected anything that made her look like a doll. Finally, she stepped out of the dressing room. The dress was a deep, midnight blue, the color of a server room in the dark. It was sleek, structured, with sharp lines that hinted at geometry and precision. It did not hide her. It defined her. She looked older, serious, and terrifyingly intelligent. I stood behind her in the mirror. "You look like a queen," I whispered. Penny looked at her reflection. She adjusted her posture, lifting her chin. She did not smile. She just stared at herself, acknowledging the person she was about to reveal to the world. She reached into her backpack and pulled out her tablet. "Do I look like the dumb one now?" "No," I said, fighting back fresh tears. "You look like the person who is about to own the room." We bought the dress. We bought shoes that didn't scuff. We bought a silver clutch that looked like a piece of hardware. As we drove home, the gray envelope sat on the dashboard between us. It was a bomb, ticking silently. And in 3 days, we were going to walk into the Vanderbilt mansion and detonate it. I looked over at Penny. She was gazing out the window, her noise-canceling headphones around her neck. She was tapping her fingers against her thigh in a complex rhythm. I realized she was probably coding in her head, optimizing the sequence for whatever she planned to do on Saturday. The victims of the Vanderbilt ambition had always been silent. But silence, as they were about to learn, was the loudest sound in the universe if you knew how to listen. The driveway of the Vanderbilt estate was not designed for cars. It was designed for processions. As I steered my 10-year-old sedan between the rows of manicured hedges that looked sharp enough to draw blood, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. We were entering the lion's den, but for the first time in 12 years, I was not walking in as prey. I was walking in as a Trojan horse. The mansion loomed ahead, a sprawling architectural beast of limestone and arrogance lit up against the night sky. Every window was ablaze with golden light, making the house look like a living thing breathing in the cool spring air. I could see the line of valets in their white jackets moving with the synchronized efficiency of ants, whisking away Bentleys and Mercedes as if they were nothing more than coats to be checked. I stopped the car. A young valet opened my door, his face practicing a neutral mask as he took in the scuffed interior of my vehicle. "Keep the ticket, ma'am," he said, handing me the slip. I took it and stepped out, smoothing the fabric of my dress. Then I walked around to the passenger side and opened the door for Penny. When she stepped out, the air around us seemed to shift. In her midnight blue structural gown, with her noise-canceling headphones resting around her neck like a futuristic collar. She did not look like the pity case the family expected. She looked like a visitor from a more advanced civilization who had come to observe the natives. "Ready?" I asked, my voice low. Penny adjusted her silver clutch, which held her tablet and a small tangled knot of USB drives. She nodded once. Her face was calm, her eyes scanning the facade of the house, likely counting the security cameras. We walked up the grand staircase. The heavy oak doors were thrown open, releasing a wave of sound and scent. The smell hit me first. It was a mixture of expensive lilies, beeswax, and the metallic tang of chilled champagne. The sound was a wall of noise, the polite, dull roar of 200 wealthy people talking about themselves, overlaid by the weeping strings of a live symphony orchestra playing in the corner of the ballroom. As we crossed the threshold, the conversation nearest to the door faltered. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. I saw the whispers ripple through the room like a breeze through tall grass. They were not looking at us with admiration. They were looking with that specific brand of charitable condescension reserved for the family failures. "Is that Mildred?" I heard a woman in pearls whisper to her husband. "And the girl I thought Candace said they kept her in a facility." "Tragic," the husband muttered, taking a sip of his drink. "Genetic lottery is a cruel game." I kept my head high, my hand resting lightly on Penny's back. We were not here to correct them, not yet. Before we could make it 10 feet into the room, a flash of crimson cut through the sea of black tuxedos and pastel gowns. It was Candace. My sister-in-law was wearing a dress the color of fresh arterial blood, strapless and tight, designed to scream dominance. Her blonde hair was coiffed into a helmet of perfection, not a single strand daring to move without permission. She moved toward us with a smile that did not reach her eyes. It was a smile that bared teeth. "Mildred!" she exclaimed, her voice pitching up an octave to simulate delight. She grasped my upper arms, her manicured nails digging into my skin just hard enough to hurt. "You actually came. I was taking bets that you would lose your nerve." "We would not miss it for the world, Candace," I said, extricating myself from her grip. "It is a big night for the family." Candace's eyes flicked down to Penny. Her smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of critical assessment, like a health inspector finding a rat in the kitchen. "And Penny," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "the dress is interesting, very modern, but the headphones." "Mildred. Really in the middle of a gala." "She needs them to regulate the noise," I said. "You know that." Candace leaned in closer, invading my personal space. The scent of her perfume, something heavy and floral, was suffocating. "Listen to me," she hissed, the facade of the gracious hostess slipping entirely. "The press is here. The board of directors is here. I have spent 6 months planning this night to launch Austin's future. Do not let her ruin it. Keep her in the corner. Do not let her wander near the stage. Do not let her touch the hors d'oeuvres. And for the love of God, do not let her make those weird humming noises she makes when she is thinking. She is not a dog." "Candace," I said coldly. "No." Candace straightened up, smoothing her red silk. "A dog can be trained to sit and stay. Just keep her invisible. Mildred, that is the best contribution she can make to this family." She patted my cheek, a degrading, patronizing tap, and swirled away to greet a senator who had just walked in. I looked down at Penny. She had put her headphones over her ears the moment Candace started speaking. She was looking at the ceiling, tracking the patterns of the crystal chandelier. She hadn't heard a word, or perhaps she had chosen to filter out the frequency of venom. We moved deeper into the room. The ballroom was suffocatingly opulent. The ceiling was painted with frescoes of cherubs and clouds, looking down on the mortals below. Waiters circulated with silver trays of caviar and truffle oil, invisible servants to the masters of the universe, near the fireplace. Holding court under a massive oil painting of an ancestor who looked suspiciously like a pirate were David's parents, the Vanderbilts. They saw us coming. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, stiffened. My father-in-law, Richard, checked his watch. "Mildred," Richard said, nodding his head a fraction of an inch, "you are late." "Hello, Richard." "Eleanor," I said. "You look lovely." Eleanor did not return the compliment. Her gaze drifted to Penny. There was no warmth in her eyes, no grandmotherly spark, just a cold, weary resignation. "Hello, Penelope," Eleanor said, speaking slowly and loudly, as if Penny were deaf or spoke a different language. "Did you have good trip?" Penny stared at her. She did not blink. She simply raised her hand and gave a small wave. Eleanor sighed, turning back to her husband. "It is getting worse. Richard, she does not even engage anymore." "Where is the boy?" Richard asked, ignoring Penny completely. "Where is the man of the hour?" as if summoned by the mention of his own greatness. Austin appeared. He was wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo that probably cost more than my car. He looked like a miniature version of his grandfather, complete with the posture of unearned superiority. He was holding a glass of sparkling cider like it was scotch, surrounded by a group of adults who were nodding sycophantically at whatever he was saying. "It was simple, really," Austin was saying, his voice carrying over the music. "The calculus on the state exam was derivative. I finished 40 minutes early. I honestly do not know why the other students struggle so much. Perhaps their cognitive processing just is not up to the Vanderbilt standard." The adults chuckled politely. "A true prodigy," one man said. I felt a surge of nausea. I knew, because Penny had shown me the school records she had hacked, that Austin had scored in the 45th percentile on the state standardized tests. The state exam he was bragging about was a private competition sponsored by his own grandfather's shell company. The trophy he was parading around was essentially a prop. Austin saw us. He broke away from his admirers and sauntered over, a smirk plastering his face. "Aunt Mildred," he said, nodding. Then he turned to Penny. "Hey, glitch?" Penny looked at him. She took off her headphones and let them rest on her neck. "Nice dress," Austin sneered. "Did you 3D print it? You look like a robot, which fits, I guess." "Congratulations on tonight, Austin," I said, stepping between them. "We are looking forward to your speech." "It is going to be historic," Austin said, puffing out his chest. "Mom says it is going to go viral. I am going to be the face of the next generation of mathematics." He leaned in toward Penny, lowering his voice so the adults wouldn't hear. "Try not to drool when I'm on stage. Okay, the camera adds 10 pounds, but it can't fix stupid." He laughed and walked away, high-fiving a waiter as he passed. Penny watched him go. She reached into her clutch and touched the surface of her tablet. She didn't look angry. She looked ready. We found a table in the back, near the kitchen doors. Just as Candace had suggested, it was the exile table, populated by distant cousins and elderly aunts who had been forgotten by the main branch of the family. I sat down, my hand instinctively clutching my purse. The letter from MIT was inside, resting against the lining like a loaded weapon. Every time I touched the leather bag, I felt a jolt of electricity. "Are you okay?" I whispered to Penny. She nodded. She took out her tablet and placed it on the table, concealed behind a floral centerpiece. Her fingers began to move across the screen. She wasn't playing a game. She was working. "What are you doing?" I asked softly. She turned the screen slightly. It showed a schematic of the room. There were dots representing the wireless projection system, the audio feed, and the lighting grid, waiting for the signal. She typed. The room was filling up. The noise level was rising. Waiters were refilling glasses at a dangerous pace. I watched the elite of Boston get louder and looser. Suddenly, a shadow fell over our table. It was a man I didn't recognize, red-faced and swaying slightly. He held a martini glass at a precarious angle. He looked at Penny, then at me. "Is this the girl?" he asked loudly. "The one Candace told us about." I stiffened. "Excuse me." "The quiet one," the man slurred. He leaned down, putting his face uncomfortably close to Penny's. "Hey there, sweetheart. Can you talk? Can you say hello?" Penny didn't move. She stared straight ahead. "Come on," the man teased, poking her shoulder with a thick finger. "Cat got your tongue? Or is there nobody home upstairs?" He laughed at his own joke. Looking around for validation, I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Touch my daughter again," I said, my voice low and trembling with a rage that had been suppressed for a decade. "And you will be eating that martini glass." The man blinked. Surprised by the ferocity in my eyes, he took a step back, holding his hands up in mock surrender. "Whoa! Easy there, tiger. Just having some fun. No need to get hysterical. It is a party." He wandered off, muttering about crazy mothers. I sat down, my heart pounding. I looked at Penny. She hadn't flinched. She reached out and squeezed my hand. 3 minutes. She typed on her tablet. The lights in the ballroom began to dim. The orchestra stopped playing mid-measure. A spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the small stage at the front of the room where a podium stood, draped in the Vanderbilt crest. A hush fell over the crowd. The air grew thick with anticipation. Candace stepped into the spotlight. She glowed. She looked like a conqueror surveying her territory. She tapped the microphone, the sound echoing through the cavernous room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth as silk. "Thank you for joining us on this momentous evening." I looked at Penny. She was not looking at the stage. She was looking at her tablet. Her finger was hovering over the Enter key. The lion's den was dark and full of teeth. But the lions had made a fatal mistake. They thought they were the only ones with claws. "Showtime," I whispered. Penny's finger dropped. The spotlight cut through the darkness like a scalpel, white and blinding, severing the room in two. On one side was the huddled mass of Boston's financial aristocracy, hidden in the comfortable shadows of their wealth. On the other side, bathed in that unforgiving beam, stood my sister-in-law, Candace, and her son, Austin. The microphone stand was adjusted to her height, but she unclipped it, holding the device with the practiced ease of a woman who believes her voice is the only sound worth hearing. She wore the silence of the room like a mink coat, luxuriating in the attention, letting the pause stretch out until it became almost uncomfortable. "Legacies," Candace began, her voice reverberating off the frescoed ceiling. "They are not built on luck. They are not built on accidents. They are built on blood." She began to pace the small stage, the train of her red dress dragging behind her like a pool of spilled wine. For 4 generations, the Vanderbilt name has been synonymous with cognitive excellence. My great-grandfather did not just build railroads, he engineered the logistics of a nation. My father-in-law, the esteemed Richard Vanderbilt, did not just invest in technology, he predicted the Silicon Revolution 10 years before it happened. She paused to gesture toward Richard, who raised his glass from the front row, his face a mask of stoic pride. "We are a family of architects," Candace continued, her voice gaining strength. "Architects of industry, architects of the future. But genetics is a fragile thing. It must be cultivated. It must be protected. It is a flame that must be fanned, lest it flicker and die out in a world that increasingly celebrates mediocrity." I sat in the back, my hands folded in my lap. My knuckles were white. Beside me, Penny was motionless. The blue glow of her tablet was hidden beneath the tablecloth. But I could feel the heat radiating from her small body. She was not looking at the stage. She was looking down, her eyes tracking invisible data streams. Candace stopped pacing and placed a hand on Austin's shoulder. He stood a little straighter, puffing out his chest, a smirk playing on his lips that he tried and failed to hide. "Tonight," Candace said, beaming at her son, "we are here to ensure that the flame burns brighter than ever. We live in an age of chaos, but in this family, we produce order, we produce genius." She looked out at the crowd, her eyes shining with tears that I knew were summoned on command. "My son, Austin, at 12 years old, he has already surpassed the high school curriculum. He sees the world in equations, while other children are playing video games. Austin is contemplating the mysteries of calculus. He is the undeniable proof that the Vanderbilt line is not just surviving, but evolving." The crowd murmured their approval. A few people clapped politely. Austin soaked it up, giving a little wave that looked practiced, like a politician on a campaign trail. "To honor this gift," Candace announced, her voice rising to a crescendo, and to ensure that his potential is unshackled by the mundane constraints of traditional education, the family is taking a historic step. Tonight, I am trembling with pride to announce the formation of the Vanderbilt Future Fund. A gasp went through the room. This was the money shot. With an initial endowment of $5 million, Candace said, enunciating every syllable of the number. This fund will be dedicated solely to the educational and entrepreneurial pursuits of the next generation's leader. It is a war chest for brilliance, and it will be managed, in trust, for the only prodigy of this generation, for Austin. Thunderous applause broke out. The room erupted. $5 million. It was an obscene amount of money to hand to a 12-year-old boy who had cheated on his algebra test, but the crowd didn't care. They were applauding the money. Not the boy. They were applauding the power. Austin grinned, a wide, shark-like expression. He looked out at the audience, not with gratitude, but with expectation, as if this was exactly what he was owed for existing. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. It was not jealousy. It was disgust. I knew the truth about that money. It wasn't just family wealth. It was drawn from the same accounts that were supposed to support the entire extended family, including the educational trusts for other cousins. Candace was cannibalizing the family resources to build a throne for her son. Candace raised her hand. Silencing the room, the applause died down instantly. She wasn't finished. She took a step closer to the edge of the stage. The lighting shifted slightly, widening the beam. Candace's expression changed. The triumph melted away, replaced by a look of exaggerated, heavy-hearted sorrow. She clasped her hands over her heart. But, she sighed into the microphone, nobility is not just about celebrating strength, it is also about mercy. It is about looking after those who fell behind. My heart stopped. I knew what was coming. I wanted to stand up, to grab Penny and run, to shield her from the venom that was about to be spat, but I was frozen. Candace's eyes scanned the room until they found us. She pointed, a literal finger of accusation pointing into the shadows of the back corner. The spotlight operator, following her cue, swiveled a second, smaller light. It swept across the room and landed directly on our table. I blinked, blinded by the sudden glare. I felt naked. Penny didn't move. She sat frozen in the circle of light, her headphones around her neck, her hands hidden under the table. My sister-in-law, Mildred, and her daughter, Penny, are with us tonight, Candace said. Her voice was dripping with syrup, sweet and poisonous. We all know the tragedy that befell my late brother's branch of the family, not just the loss of David, but the burden that poor Mildred has had to carry. The room was deadly silent. All eyes were on us, 200 pairs of eyes, judging, pitying, dismissing. Penny, Candace continued, speaking to the crowd as if Penny were an object on display. Struggles, we all know this, the silence, the confusion, the inability to connect with the world of intellect that Austin thrives in. It is heartbreaking. I started to rise, my legs shaking. Sit down, Mildred, Candace commanded softly, though her voice boomed through the speakers. Let us be generous. She turned back to the crowd. While the future fund is for the leaders, we cannot forget the followers. The family has discussed this, and we have decided that we have a moral obligation to the weakest among us. She paused for effect. We are establishing a separate, modest stipend, a permanent social welfare allowance for Penny. A murmur of confusion and polite agreement rippled through the room. Let us be honest, Candace said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that everyone could hear. We must face reality. The dumb one, as Austin affectionately calls her. She will never be a CEO. She will never be a scientist. She will likely never be able to hold a job or contribute to society in any meaningful way. She is a permanent dependent. The words hung in the air like smoke. The dumb one. She had said it. She had said it into a microphone, broadcast to the most powerful people in Boston. She had stripped my daughter of her name, her dignity, and her future, reducing her to a caricature of incompetence. This allowance, Candace concluded, looking at Penny with a benevolent smile that made my skin crawl, is our act of charity. It ensures she will be fed and clothed, even if she cannot understand the world around her. It is the compassion of the strong for the broken. Please, join me in applauding the family's mercy. The applause started slowly, hesitant at first, then growing louder. It was the applause of relief. The wealthy elite loved nothing more than feeling like they were part of a charitable moment. They clapped for their own perceived goodness. They clapped for the tragedy of the broken child and the generosity of the golden family. I looked at Austin. He was not clapping. He was looking directly at Penny, and he was laughing. He mouthed the words again, "Dumb one." I looked down at my daughter. Penny's head was bowed. Her chin was tucked against her chest, to the room. She looked crushed. She looked like a child shamed into submission, hiding from the light that exposed her flaws. But I was sitting next to her. I could see what they could not. I saw her hands. They were not trembling with fear. They were gripping the fabric of her midnight blue dress so tightly that her knuckles were white. But her fingers were not idle. Her thumb was tapping against her index finger in a rhythmic, rapid sequence. 1, 0, 1, 1. She wasn't crying. She was counting. And then I saw her face, hidden by the curtain of her hair, just visible to me from my angle. Her lips were not quivering. They were pressed together in a thin, hard line, and her eyes were open. They were dry, and they were burning with a cold, terrifying fire. She was waiting. She was waiting for the applause to reach its peak. She was letting them have their moment. She was letting Candace climb to the very top of the mountain of her own ego so that the fall would be fatal. My blood felt like lava in my veins. The sound of the applause sounded like static in my ears. I looked at Candace, standing there like a queen, bathing in the adulation, thinking she had won, thinking she had buried us. I reached into my purse. My fingers brushed against the cool, crisp paper of the envelope. The red stamp of MIT felt like a trigger under my fingertips. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of lilies and betrayal. The applause began to die down. Candace raised the microphone to her lips again, ready to dismiss us, ready to move on to the champagne and the celebration of her son. "Thank you," Candace said. "Now, if everyone would please raise their glasses to Austin." "No," I said. It was a whisper. Lost in the room. I stood up. I did not ask for a microphone. I did not ask for permission. I simply stood up, pushing my chair back with a screech of wood against parquet floor that cut through the silence like a knife. Candace stopped. She looked across the room, squinting into the spotlight. "Mildred, please, do not make a scene. Just accept the gratitude and sit down." I stepped out from behind the table. I walked out of the shadows and into the center aisle, moving toward the stage. I walked with the heavy, deliberate steps of an executioner. The room went deadly quiet. The only sound was the clicking of my heels on the floor. "You want gratitude, Candace," I said, my voice projecting from the depths of my diaphragm. A trick I had learned from my father, who was a union rep. It carried without a microphone. It bounced off the walls. "You want me to thank you for calling my daughter a broken thing?" I kept walking. I was 10 feet away from the stage now. I could see the cracks in Candace's foundation. I could see the panic flickering in her eyes. "Mildred," Richard Vanderbilt barked from the front row, standing up. "Sit down. You're embarrassing yourself." I ignored him. I ignored them all. My eyes were locked on Candace. "You called her the dumb one," I said, stopping at the foot of the stairs leading up to the platform. "You told these people she is a burden. You told them she has no value." I reached into my bag. I pulled out the gray envelope. It looked innocuous in the harsh stage light. Just a piece of paper. But I held it up like a sword. "You measured her worth in noise," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "You thought because she doesn't speak, she doesn't think. You thought because she doesn't brag. She doesn't achieve. I took the first step up the stairs. Candace took a step back. Austin looked confused, his smirk faltering. But you forgot something. Candace, I said, taking the second step. Empty vessels make the most noise, and my daughter. She is an ocean. I reached the center of the stage. I stood next to Candace. I was taller than her in my heels. I loomed over her. I snatched the microphone from her hand. She was too stunned to resist. I turned to the crowd. I looked at the faces that had just been pitying us. You applauded her cruelty, I said to the room. Now, you are going to listen to the truth. I ripped the top of the envelope open. The sound was sharp, tearing through the silence. The time for hiding was over. The time for politeness was dead. Austin solves calculus problems from a textbook, I said, holding the letter up to the light. That is cute, but 3 days ago, the Department of Artificial Intelligence at MIT sent this to my house. I looked down at Penny. She lifted her head. She looked at me, and then she looked at the screen behind the stage. She nodded once. It was the signal. Read it, Candace, I said, shoving the letter into my sister-in-law's chest. Read it to the room, or are the words too big for you? The silence that followed my challenge was not the respectful silence of a library. It was the suffocating vacuum of a room where the air had suddenly been sucked out. I stood center stage, towering over Candace not in height, but in the sheer, undeniable weight of my rage. The envelope I had pressed against her chest was the only barrier between us, a thin shield of paper that held the weight of an atomic bomb. Candace recoiled as if the paper burned her skin. She took a half step back, her heels clicking nervously on the polished wood of the stage. Her eyes darted to the wings, looking for security, looking for her husband, looking for anyone to save her from the woman she had spent a decade underestimating. Mildred, she hissed, her voice low enough that the microphone didn't catch it, but loud enough for me to hear the tremor of panic beneath the veneer of control. You are having a breakdown. This is embarrassing. Look at you. You are shaking. I am not shaking from fear, Candace, I replied, my voice steady and cold. I am vibrating with the truth. Candace tried to regain her footing. She forced a tight, pitying smile onto her face and turned back to the audience, shielding the microphone with her body. Ladies and gentlemen, please forgive my sister-in-law. Grief takes many forms, and sometimes the mind simply snaps under the pressure of raising a special needs child. She turned back to me, her eyes hard as flint. Get off my stage, Mildred. Take the charity stipend. Go buy yourself a new car. Go buy your daughter some therapy. Just take the money and get out before I have security drag you out. She reached out to grab my arm, her fingers like talons. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. Instead, I moved with a speed that surprised even me. I stepped into her space, invading her personal bubble, and with a firm, decisive motion, I took the microphone from her hand. It wasn't a struggle. It was a transfer of power. She was so shocked by my audacity that her fingers simply opened and let go. The master of ceremonies, a hired professional in a tuxedo who had been lurking in the shadows, took a step forward to intervene. I turned my head and fixed him with a look so withering, so full of maternal ferocity, that he froze mid-step and retreated back into the darkness. I was alone with the microphone. I was alone with the room. I looked out at the sea of faces, 200 of Boston's wealthiest citizens, frozen in their chairs, their champagne flutes halfway to their mouths. They were waiting for the train wreck. They were waiting for the poor, hysterical widow to scream or cry so they could have a story to tell at brunch the next morning. I would not give them a train wreck. I would give them a reckoning. You just called my daughter what? I asked. My voice boomed through the high-end sound system, crisp and clear, devoid of any hysteria. It hit the back wall and bounced back, echoing in the rafters. The dumb one. I let the question hang there. I looked directly at the table where the senator sat. I looked at the board of directors. I looked at the investors who had just pledged millions to Austin's future. You applauded, I said, my tone dropping to a conversational, almost intimate level. I watched you. You all clapped. You clapped because you thought you were witnessing an act of kindness. You thought that by throwing a few crumbs at my daughter, you were proving your own nobility. I walked to the edge of the stage. The spotlight followed me, leaving Candace and Austin in the shadows behind me. You look at Penny, and you see a girl who wears headphones to block out the noise of your judgment. You see a girl who types because her voice gets trapped in her throat when she is stressed, and because she does not speak. You assume she does not think. You assume her mind is an empty room. I scanned the crowd, meeting the eyes of the man who had mocked Penny earlier. He looked down, suddenly finding his shoes very interesting. But you are wrong, I said, my voice hardening into steel. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is focus. While you are busy talking about how smart you are, my daughter is listening. While you are busy polishing your trophies, my daughter is analyzing the structure of the world you live in. I turned back to Candace. She was standing stiffly, her face pale beneath her makeup. Austin was standing next to her, looking confused and petulant, like a child who had been told playtime was over. You are so proud of this, I said, gesturing to the banner behind them that read Vanderbilt Future Fund. $5 million for a boy who can solve a quadratic equation, a boy who you claim is the only prodigy of this generation. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. My daughter does not need your fund. She does not need your pity, and she certainly does not need your last name to validate her existence. I raised the gray envelope again. This time, I held it high, like a lantern in the dark. 3 days ago, I announced, my voice ringing with authority. This arrived at our house. It was not delivered by a family lawyer. It was not a handout from a guilty relative. It came via courier from Cambridge. I ripped the rest of the envelope open. I pulled out the letter. Unfolding the crisp, heavy paper, I smoothed it out on the podium, right over the Vanderbilt crest. Candace bragged that Austin is doing high school math in the 6th grade, I said. That is impressive. But last month, the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology had a problem. They had a cryptographic matrix that their PhD candidates could not solve. They posted it online as a challenge for the global community. I looked at the letter, reading the words that I had memorized, the words that had become my scripture. I'm going to read this to you, I said, and I want you to listen. I want you to listen with the same intensity that you listened to Candace's lies. The room was deathly silent. Not a fork touched a plate. Not a cough broke the stillness. I began to read. Dear Ms. Hightower, I read, my voice projecting clearly. Regarding your submission to the Falcon Matrix Challenge, we have verified your solution. The algorithmic approach you utilized to bypass the quantum encryption layer was not only correct, but it also demonstrated a level of innovative logic that we have not seen in our laboratory in 20 years. I paused, letting the technical weight of the words sink in. I saw a few heads in the audience tilt, the tech investors, the people who actually understood what I was saying. Their expressions shifted from pity to shock. I continued reading. Your handle, Silent Coder, has been tracked to this address. We understand that you are a minor. However, the Board of Regents has authorized a special exception to our standard admission protocols. We are formally inviting you to join the Project Aletheia Artificial Intelligence Research Group as a junior fellow. I looked up. Do you know what Project Aletheia is? I asked the room. It is not a summer camp. It is a government-funded think tank for the most advanced artificial intelligence development in the country. They do not invite 12-year-olds. They invite geniuses. I went back to the letter for the final blow. Furthermore, I read, recognizing the value of the proprietary code you submitted, the Institute has partnered with Apex Dynamics to secure the patent rights for your work. Enclosed is the initial licensing agreement, which includes a signing bonus of $250,000. and a projected annual royalty stream estimated at $1.5 million. I lowered the paper. $1.5 million, I repeated, looking directly at Candace. A year, not a one-time charity fund, earned income, from her own mind. From the mind you called broken. I turned the letter around so the audience could see the red MIT seal at the bottom. My daughter is not a charity case, I said, my voice vibrating with triumph. She is a prodigy. She is not the dumb one of this family. She is the only one in this room who is actually creating the future you all claim to care so much about. I looked at Austin. While you were memorizing formulas to impress your mother, Penny was rewriting the code that runs the world. The silence in the room changed texture. It was no longer a vacuum. It was electric. It was the sound of 200 paradigms shifting at once. The look on the guests' faces transformed from confusion to awe, and then to a dawning, horrified realization of how badly they had misjudged the situation. Candace looked like she had been slapped. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The red dress that was meant to symbolize her power now looked like a desperate cry for attention. But I wasn't done. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. You might think I'm making this up, I said. You might think this is just a mother defending her child with a forged letter. After all, deception runs in this family, doesn't it? Candace flinched. Penny, I said, speaking into the microphone but addressing the girl in the back of the room. Show them, I pointed to the massive projection screen behind the stage. The screen that had been displaying a slideshow of Austin's achievements photos of him holding participation trophies and shaking hands with paid tutors. The screen flickered, the image of Austin distorted, pixelated, and then vanished. The room gasped. In its place, a black terminal window appeared. Lines of green code cascaded down the screen like a digital waterfall. It was fast, complex, and beautiful. Then, the code cleared, and a video window opened. It was a pre-recorded message. A man with wild gray hair and thick glasses appeared on the screen. He was sitting in an office cluttered with servers and whiteboards covered in equations. A murmur of recognition went through the tech sector of the audience. Someone whispered, "That is Dr. Eris Thorne, the head of the MIT Media Lab." On the screen, "Doctor." Thorne leaned into the camera. "Hello?" "The digital doctor," Thorne said, his voice booming through the speakers. "I am recording this for Penny Hightower. I was told you might be at a party tonight. I just wanted to say personally the patch you sent us for the Falcon Matrix. It was brilliant. We have been stuck on that variable for 6 months. You saw the pattern in the chaos. We are holding a desk for you in the lab. Do not keep us waiting." The video froze on Doctor Thorne's smiling face. I looked at Candace. She was trembling. She looked small. She looked defeated. "You wanted to give her an allowance," I asked, my voice soft now, but amplified to reach every corner of the room. "You wanted to give her a few $1,000s to keep her quiet, to keep her out of sight." I gestured to the screen, where the image of the world's leading computer scientist praising my daughter still loomed large. "You cannot afford her," I said. I turned back to the audience. "My daughter is not the dumb one," I said, delivering the final verdict. "She is the smartest person in this room, and tonight, she is done listening to you. Tonight, you are going to listen to her." I slammed the microphone down on the podium. The sound was like a gunshot. I did not wait for applause. I did not wait for an apology. I turned my back on Candace and Austin, and I walked down the stairs. I walked toward the back of the room, toward the table in the shadows where the girl in the midnight blue dress sat. As I walked, the crowd parted for me. They pulled their chairs in. They stepped back. It was not out of pity anymore. It was out of fear, and it was out of respect. I reached the table. Penny was looking up at me. Her face was calm, but her eyes were shining. She didn't sign anything. She didn't type anything. She just reached out and took my hand. We had fired the first shot, and it had been a direct hit. But as I looked back at the stage, at the ruin of Candace's perfect evening, I knew the battle wasn't over. We had exposed the truth about Penny. Now, it was time to expose the lie about Austin. The silence that I had commanded only lasted for a moment before the denial set in. It started with Candace. She stood on the stage, her chest heaving, her red dress looking like a wound against the dark wood of the podium. She gripped the microphone stand as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. "It is a trick," Candace stammered, her voice shrill and amplifying through the speakers with a feedback whine that made the guests wince. "It is a deep fake. Do you think we are stupid? Mildred, anyone can hire an actor to record a video. Anyone can print a letterhead." She looked out at the audience, her eyes wide and desperate. "My sister-in-law is a software engineer. She faked this. It is a desperate, pathetic attempt to upstage my son on his night. Security. Where is security?" The crowd murmured. Doubt is a contagious thing, and Candace knew how to spread it. The shock on their faces began to curdle into suspicion. People shifted in their seats, looking from the stage to me, wondering if they had indeed been duped by a high-tech parlor trick. I stopped walking. I was halfway back to our table, but I turned around. I did not need to shout anymore. I had the attention of the room, and more importantly, I had the truth. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was a 3-year-old model with a cracked screen, a stark contrast to the sleek devices the billionaires in the room carried. But it was connected to the most powerful server in the building, Penny's tablet. "You want to talk about reality?" "Candace," I said, my voice projecting clearly. "You want to talk about what is fake and what is real. Let us talk about the science." I tapped the screen of my phone twice, behind Candace. The massive projection screen that had gone black suddenly flared to life again, but this time, it was not a video. It was a live data stream. It was a visualization of a complex network, a web of glowing nodes and pulsating lines of energy that looked like a digital nervous system. "What you are looking at," I said, walking slowly back toward the center of the room, "is not a screensaver. It is a real-time simulation of the North American power grid." I saw the CEO of Vertex Energy, a man named Mr. Henderson, who was sitting near the front, lean forward. His glasses reflected the blue light of the screen. He recognized what he was seeing. "For 20 years, I continued, adopting the clinical, precise tone of a lecturer. "The biggest problem in renewable energy has not been generation. It has been distribution. We can capture solar energy, but we lose nearly 40% of it during transmission due to thermal resistance and grid inefficiency. It is the bottleneck that has stopped us from moving away from fossil fuels." I pointed at the screen. The lines of energy were shifting, rerouting themselves in a chaotic dance. "This is the current model," I explained. "It is reactive. It waits for a surge and then tries to compensate. It is slow. It is wasteful. It is, to use your favorite word, Candace, dumb." Then, I swiped my finger across my phone. The chaos on the screen vanished. The lines straightened. The nodes pulsed in a perfect, synchronized rhythm. The energy flow became a stream of pure, unadulterated efficiency. The red zones turned green. The loss metrics in the corner of the screen dropped to near zero. "This," I said, "is the Hightower Protocol." A gasp went through the room, not from the socialites, but from the engineers, the investors, and the tech moguls who understood the language of the future. "It utilizes a predictive algorithm based on fluid dynamics and quantum probability," I said, the words tasting sweet on my tongue. "It does not react to the grid. It anticipates it. It reroutes power microseconds before a bottleneck occurs. It effectively virtualizes the energy distribution, creating a frictionless environment for electrons." "Mr." Henderson stood up. He didn't seem to realize he was doing it. He was staring at the screen with his mouth slightly open. That is the Grail," he whispered. "That is the stochastic optimization we have been theorizing about for a decade. But math is impossible." "The math was impossible," I corrected him, looking at Candace. Until a 12-year-old girl who thinks in 6 dimensions decided to solve it because she was bored. Candace was shaking her head. Stop it. Stop confuse everyone with this technobabble. It means nothing. It means everything, I snapped. I tapped my phone again. A new video window opened on the screen, overlaying the simulation. It was not Dr. Thorne this time. It was a woman with severe gray hair and eyes that looked like they could cut glass. The caption beneath her name read, Dr. Elena Rostova, Chair of the Department of Computer Science, MIT. The video began to play. To Penny Hightower. Doctor, Rostova said. Her voice was clipped, accented, and utterly devoid of the warmth usually reserved for children. It was the voice of a scientist speaking to a peer. I have reviewed your submission regarding the virtualization of clean energy transport. I must admit, when my team first ran your code, we assumed there was an error. The efficiency metrics were too high. We ran it again and again. Doctor, Rostova took off her glasses and looked directly into the camera. You have not just solved a puzzle, Penny. You have solved the energy crisis. Your solution for virtualized clean energy is the most breakthrough development I have seen in 20 years. We are not just offering you a place in the lab. We are honored to welcome you. The history books will remember the day you walked through our doors. The video ended. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a worldview shattering. Candace looked like she was shrinking physically. The charity case narrative was evaporating like mist under the sun. But I wasn't done. I had proved the genius. Now I had to prove the power. You offered her a stipend, I said to Candace, my voice dripping with disdain. You offered to feed her and clothe her like a pet. You established a $5 million fund for Austin, based on the promise that one day, maybe, he might do something useful. I took a step closer to the stage. Let us talk about value. Candace, real value. Not the potential value of a boy who cheats on his homework, but the realized value of a girl who just rewrote the laws of physics. I swiped my phone screen one last time. The simulation disappeared. The video disappeared. In their place, a simple, stark banking interface appeared. It was a secure portal for a trust account held at the Boston Private Bank. The account holder's name was listed clearly, Penelope Hightower. Below it was a transaction log. There was a single, massive deposit dated just yesterday. It was the initial licensing fee from a global energy conglomerate that had rushed to secure the rights to the Hightower protocol before the patent ink was even dry. Read the number. Candace, I commanded. Candace stared at the screen. She blinked. She squinted. She didn't want to see it. She wanted it to be a mistake. The number was $10,250,000. $10 million, I said, my voice ringing out like a judge delivering a verdict. That is just the signing bonus. That does not include the royalties, which are projected to be $3 million a year for the next 20 years. I looked at the audience. My daughter made double your entire family foundation in a single afternoon, I said. And she did it without a gala. She did it without a tuxedo. She did it without a mother screaming about her genes from a stage. I turned back to Candace, who was now clutching the podium for support, her face the color of ash. You wanted to give her an allowance, I asked, laughing softly. Candace, look at that screen. Penny does not need your money. She does not need your pity. I gestured to the opulent ballroom, the crystal chandeliers, the velvet drapes, the expensive orchestra that had stopped playing 20 minutes ago. With what she made yesterday, I said, my voice cold and hard, she could buy this entire banquet hall, fire the staff, and turn it into a server farm if she wanted to. She could buy your house. Candace, she could buy this entire event and send you the bill. I saw the realization hit Austin. He was looking at the screen, counting the zeros. He knew what money meant. He knew that $5 million was a lot, but $10 million was power. He looked at Penny, really looked at her. For the first time in his life, he didn't see a glitch anymore. He saw a titan, and he looked terrified. So you can keep your charity, I said. Turning away from the stage and walking back to my daughter, we have work to do, and unlike your son, my daughter's work actually changes the world. I reached the table where Penny sat. She was calm. She was putting her tablet back into her clutch. She didn't look arrogant. She looked bored. To her, the money was just another number. The applause was just noise. The only thing that mattered was the code. The guests were staring at her with a mixture of fear and reverence. The man who had mocked her was gone, likely having slipped out the back door to avoid the humiliation of being in the presence of a millionaire he had called an idiot. I stood beside Penny and placed my hand on her shoulder. "We are leaving now," I announced to the room. "Enjoy your party, enjoy your champagne, and when you go home tonight and turn on your lights, just remember who made sure the power stayed on." I looked at the stage one last time. Candace was standing there, a queen without a kingdom, destroyed by the very weapon she had tried to use against us, the truth. But even as I savored the victory, I knew the final blow was yet to land. We had proven Penny's worth. Now, we had to dismantle the lie of Austin's genius. The MIT letter had been the shield. The next revelation would be the sword. And I could see the man in the corner, the CEO of the tech company, signaling to his assistant. The sharks were circling, but this time, they weren't coming for us. They were coming for the fraud on the stage. The ballroom had descended into a state of suspended animation, the kind of chaos that feels deceptively quiet right before the screaming starts. On the stage, Candace looked like a wax figure placed too close to a fire. Her composure was melting, dripping away to reveal the frantic, terrified creature beneath. She gripped the podium with such force that I could see the tendons in her hands straining against her skin, threatening to snap. "It is a mistake," she stammered, her voice echoing shrilly through the speakers, cracking under the weight of her own denial. "It is a glitch, or a trick. Yes, it is a trick. Mildred is a programmer. She manipulated the projection system. She forged the bank interface." She looked out at the audience, her eyes darting from face to face, begging for an ally, begging for someone to step into her delusion and validate it. "Do you really believe a 12-year-old girl who cannot even order a sandwich in a restaurant earned $10 million? Candace laughed, but it was a manic, jagged sound. "It is absurd. It is a deep fake. Security. I want this woman and her daughter removed immediately for fraud and disrupting a private event." The security guards near the doors shifted their weight. Looking uncertain, they looked at Candace, then they looked at the screen where the MIT seal still glowed, and then they looked at Penny. They did not move. They knew the smell of power, and for the first time in the history of this estate, the power was not radiating from the woman in the red dress. "This is not fraud," I said calmly, standing my ground next to Penny. "It is the future, and I understand why it terrifies you. Candace, the future does not care about your old money or your last name." "You are lying," Candace shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Austin is the genius. Austin is the one." And then, the intervention happened. It did not come from the security guards. It did not come from the family lawyers. It came from the front row, from the table reserved for the most high-value partners of the Vanderbilt estate. A man stood up. It was Arthur Sterling. Everyone in the room knew him. He was the CEO of Omnicore Systems, a defense contractor and tech giant that provided the back-end infrastructure for half the government agencies on the East Coast. He was a man who moved mountains with a phone call, a man who rarely attended social galas unless there was a strategic advantage. He was also a man who never, ever looked rattled. But tonight, Arthur Sterling looked shaken. He did not look at Candace. He did not look at Austin. He pushed his chair back, knocking it over in his haste. He ignored the spilled champagne soaking into the tablecloth. His eyes were locked on one thing and one thing only: Penny. "Silent, Coder," he whispered. It wasn't meant for the microphone, but in the stunned silence of the room, his voice carried like a bell. He began to walk toward us. He didn't walk like a guest approaching a host. He walked like a pilgrim approaching a shrine. "Mr. Sterling?" Candace called out, a note of desperate hope in her voice. "Arthur, please, tell these people. Tell them how impossible this is. You know technology. Tell them my sister-in-law is faking this." Arthur Sterling walked right past the stage. He didn't even turn his head to acknowledge Candace's existence. He cut through the crowd, which parted for him like the Red Sea, until he stood directly in front of our table in the shadows. He stopped 3 feet away from Penny. He took a breath, smoothed his tie, and then, to the absolute shock of 200 onlookers, he bowed his head slightly. It was a gesture of profound respect, of peer acknowledging peer. "Young lady," Sterling said, his voice thick with emotion, "are you truly the one who operates under the handle silent coder?" Penny looked up at him. She didn't shrink away. She recognized him, or rather, she recognized his digital footprint. She reached for her tablet, tapped the screen once, and turned it around to face him. On the screen was a single line of text, Omnicore Server Node 4. Patch 89 Alpha. You are welcome. Sterling let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He brought his hands up to his face, rubbing his temples as if trying to process the magnitude of the moment. "It was you," he said, looking at her with wide, wondrous eyes. "Last week, the catastrophic failure in our data center, the one that was going to expose the personal data of 4 million federal employees. We were down for 6 hours. My best engineers were crying in the war room. They said the encryption was unbreakable. They said we were dead." He took a step closer, disregarding the social norms of personal space. "And then," Sterling continued, turning slightly to address the room, his voice gaining strength, "at 3 a.m, a patch appeared on our secure server. No name, no invoice, just a file named fix_it_please. We ran it. It didn't just fix the breach. It rebuilt the entire firewall architecture in 10 seconds. It saved my company. It saved the government from a national security nightmare." He turned back to Penny. "We traced the IP address to Boston, but we hit a dead end. We thought it was a rogue AI. We thought it was a foreign state actor." He laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. "And it was you, a 12-year-old girl sitting in a gala dress." The room was spinning. The guests were looking at Penny not just as a wealthy prodigy now, but as a savior, a mythical figure. "We owe you everything," Sterling said, his voice trembling. "I have a check in my pocket for a consulting fee that I was going to give to anyone who could tell me how that patch worked. It is blank. I want you to fill it out." The attention of the room shifted physically. It was a tangible wave. Every eye, every camera, every whisper was now focused entirely on the small girl in the midnight blue dress. The stage where Candace and Austin stood was suddenly a desolate island, irrelevant and forgotten, and Austin could not handle it. The golden boy, the center of the universe, the child who had been told since birth that he was the sun around which the world revolved, was being eclipsed, and he did not have the emotional maturity to withstand the darkness. "Hey!" Austin shouted from the stage. He grabbed the microphone stand and shook it. "Hey, look at me. Why are you talking to her?" He ran down the stairs, tripping over his own feet in his haste. He didn't look like a prodigy. He looked like a spoiled, petulant child in a costume. He stormed over to where Mr. Sterling was standing. "She is stupid," Austin yelled, his face turning a blotchy red. "She cannot even talk. I am the one who won the math trophy. I am the one with the fund. Look at me." He tried to shove his way between Sterling and Penny. "Ask me a math question. Ask me anything I know. All the capitals of Europe. I know the periodic table." Sterling looked down at Austin with an expression of mild annoyance, like one might look at a buzzing mosquito. "Young man," Sterling said coldly, "step aside. The adults are talking." "I am not a child," Austin screamed, stomping his foot on the floor. Tears of rage were streaming down his face. "I am the Vanderbilt heir. She is just a glitch. My mom said she is a retard." The word hung in the air, ugly and brutal. The gasps from the crowd were audible. The mask had fallen completely. This was not the refined, intellectual genius Candace had sold them. This was a cruel, entitled bully, parroting the hate speech he had learned at the dinner table. "Austin!" Candace cried out, running down the stairs after him, realizing too late that her son was dismantling his own reputation in real time. But the damage was done. The investors were exchanging looks of disgust. The senator was shaking his head. The future leader looked like a monster. And then, the pivot happened. The Vanderbilt survival instinct is a legendary thing. It is faster than light, and completely devoid of shame. My in-laws, Richard and Eleanor, had been watching the scene unfold with horror. But the moment Arthur Sterling, a man worth billions, offered Penny a blank check, I saw the calculation occur behind their eyes. I saw the gears shift. They realized that the ship named Austin was sinking, and the ship named Penny was a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. They didn't run to Austin. They didn't run to comfort their crying grandson. They walked toward Penny. Eleanor moved with a speed I didn't know she possessed. She pushed past a waiter, her face arranging itself into a mask of doting affection. "Oh, my precious girl," Eleanor cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She reached out her hands, her diamond bracelets clinking. "Penelope, Grandma is so proud of you." She stepped into the circle of light, ignoring me, ignoring Sterling. "We knew," Eleanor declared to the room, beaming like a lighthouse. "We always knew she was special, didn't we, Richard? That is why we gave her space. That is why we let her have her quiet time. We were nurturing her genius in secret." Richard nodded vigorously, stepping up beside his wife. He looked at Penny with the hungry eyes of a wolf looking at a lamb made of gold. "Absolutely," Richard boomed. "The Vanderbilt blood runs strong in her. She has my father's mind, a true chip off the old block. Penny, darling, come to grandfather. We have so much to discuss about your future." "The family needs to manage these assets for you. We need to protect you." They closed in on her. They were like vultures circling a kill, except the kill was alive and worth $10 million. They reached for her, Eleanor for her shoulder, Richard for her hand. They wanted to touch the money. They wanted to claim ownership of the success they had mocked an hour ago. Penny froze. For the first time all night, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not fear of the crowd, or the noise, or the attention. Fear of them. Fear of their cold hands and their fake smiles. She had spent her life being invisible to these people, and she preferred the invisibility to this predatory affection. She did not sign anything. She did not type anything. She simply took a step back, then another. She turned her body away from Eleanor's grasping hands. She moved with a desperate, fluid motion, sliding behind me. She pressed her face against my back, gripping the fabric of my dress with both hands. She buried herself in my shadow, using my body as a shield against the sudden, suffocating love of her tormentors. It was a silent rejection, but it screamed louder than any words. The room saw it. They saw the beloved grandparents reaching out, and they saw the cherished granddaughter recoiling in terror. They saw the truth of our family dynamic in a single, heartbreaking gesture. Eleanor's hands were left hovering in empty air. She looked at her empty palms, then up at me, her smile faltering. "Mildred," Eleanor said, her voice tight. "Don't be difficult. She is confused. Tell her to come to us. We are family." I felt Penny trembling against my back. It wasn't the trembling of weakness. It was the trembling of a child who finally felt safe enough to let go. Because she knew the wall standing between her and the monsters would never, ever break. I looked at Eleanor. I looked at Richard. And then I looked at the sobbing, screaming Austin being dragged away by a humiliated Candace in the background. "Family?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "You are not family. You are just people who share a last name with the bank account you want to control." I stepped forward, forcing Eleanor to retreat. "Step back," I commanded. "You had 12 years to hug her. You had 12 years to be proud of her. You don't get to start now just because she has a 7-figure balance." "Mildred," Richard blustered, his face purple. "You are forgetting your place." "No, Richard," I said, shielding my daughter with every inch of my being. "I finally found it." I looked at Mr. Sterling, who was watching the scene with a look of utter contempt for the Vanderbilts. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "my daughter appreciates your offer, but right now, I think she would like to go home. We have a lot of planning to do. Without them." Sterling nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. He didn't hand it to me. He reached around and slid it gently into Penny's clutch, which she was holding tight against my side. "Whenever you are ready, silent coder," he said softly. "The world is waiting for you." He turned and glared at Richard and Eleanor until they shrank back into the crowd. The idol of Austin Vanderbilt had not just fallen, it had shattered into dust, and from the rubble, something else was rising. Something quiet, something terrifying, something real. But the night wasn't over. The final nail had to be driven into the coffin of their reputation, and I knew exactly how to do it. Because while Penny had hacked the bank, she had also hacked the school email server. And she had found the one thing that would ensure Austin never recovered from this tantrum. The ballroom was in shambles. The illusion of Vanderbilt perfection lay in ruins like the smashed champagne flutes on the floor. Candace was clutching Austin, who was still red-faced and sobbing, while Richard and Eleanor stood frozen in a purgatory of indecision. Caught between their greed for Penny's success and the sinking ship of their grandson's reputation, most people would have left then. Most people would have taken the check, the vindication, and the moral high ground, and walked out into the cool night air. But I was not most people. I was a mother who had watched her child be systematically dehumanized for a decade. I didn't just want to win. I wanted to ensure they could never hurt her again. I needed to scorch the earth so thoroughly that nothing poisonous could ever grow in our direction again. "Wait," I said. The single word cut through the murmur of the crowd like a guillotine blade. I didn't shout it. I simply stated it with the absolute authority of someone holding all the cards. I turned back to the stage, where Candace was trying to shepherd Austin toward the exit, hoping to salvage some shred of dignity by disappearing. "We are not quite finished, Candace," I said. "There is one loose thread. You called my daughter a broken thing. You called your son a prodigy. You built this entire night, this entire fund, on the premise of his academic excellence." Candace spun around, her eyes wild. "Leave us alone. Mildred, you have made your point. You have your money. Go." "The money is irrelevant," I said, walking slowly toward a nearby waiter who was holding a tray of untouched hors d'oeuvres. I picked up a napkin, wiped my hands, and dropped it back on the tray. "This is about integrity. You see, when Penny hacked the school server to patch their security flaw, she found something else. She didn't go looking for it. It was just sitting there, like a piece of trash in a pristine room." I pulled my phone out again. The guests, who had started to gather their coats, stopped. The magnetic pull of a public execution is irresistible, especially when the victim is someone as arrogant as Candace Vanderbilt. "Austin," I said, addressing the boy directly, "do you want to tell them why you have been home from school for the last 2 weeks? Your mother said it was independent study to prepare for your calculus exams. Is that true?" Austin buried his face in his mother's dress. He knew. "Mildred, stop," Candace screamed. "This is private family business. It became public business the moment you asked these people for $5 million to fund his future." I shot back. I tapped my screen. The massive projection wall behind the stage, which had been displaying Penny's triumph, refreshed one last time. This time, it was not code. It was an email chain. The font was large enough for everyone in the back row to read. The subject line read, "Urgent disciplinary action. Austin Vanderbilt. Level 4. Infraction. The sender was Principal Edwards of the Hawthorne Academy. The recipient was Candace Vanderbilt. The date was exactly 14 days ago." I began to read the email aloud, my voice devoid of emotion, letting the facts do the cutting. "Dear Mrs. Vanderbilt," I read. We are writing to formally inform you of the decision regarding the incident on the midterm calculus examination. As discussed, the evidence is irrefutable. Austin was found in possession of a stolen answer key, which forensic analysis confirms was purchased from a senior student for $50. A gasp went through the room, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the space. The investors who had been ready to write checks for the future fund looked like they had swallowed spoiled milk. I continued reading. Furthermore, this is the third incident of academic dishonesty this semester. Per school policy, this warrants immediate expulsion. However, in light of your family's generous donation to the new gymnasium, the board has agreed to downgrade the punishment to a 2-week suspension and a 0 on the exam. This decision is contingent on strict confidentiality. I lowered the phone. Strict confidentiality, I repeated, looking at Candace. You bought his silence, you bought his grades, and then you stood on this stage and asked these people to invest in a lie. Candace looked like she had been shot. She slumped against the podium, her legs giving out. The red dress pooled around her on the floor, no longer a symbol of power, but a puddle of defeat. Austin wasn't crying anymore. He was staring at the screen, his mouth open, exposed for exactly what he was: a cheat, a fraud, and a product of his mother's toxic ambition. I turned to the crowd. I looked at the bankers, the lawyers, the titans of industry. Your heir is a cheat, I said, pointing at Austin. He didn't solve those equations. He bought them. Then I pointed to Penny, who was standing quietly by my side, clutching the business card from the billionaire. And the dumb child, I said, the one you mocked. She is the only thing in this room that is real. She is the future of American technology. And she did it without your money, without your influence, and in spite of your cruelty. The room was silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of a judgment rendered. I could see the investors pulling out their phones, making calls, likely canceling transfers and severing ties with the Vanderbilt Fund before the news hit the morning papers. I saw the socialites whispering, their eyes cold as they looked at Candace. Her social capital had just evaporated. She was radioactive. I looked at Richard and Eleanor. They were pale, trembling ghosts. They knew what this meant. The scandal would be catastrophic. The fraud, the bribery, the public humiliation, it would stain the Vanderbilt name for a generation. Richard stepped forward, his voice shaking. Mildred, please. We can fix this. We can explain. We are a family. I looked at him, and I felt nothing. The fear, the obligation, the desperate need for their approval that had plagued me since David died, it was all gone, burned away by the fire of this moment. Family, I said. Tasting the word, it tasted like ash. I walked over to the nearest table. There was a microphone lying there, abandoned by the MC in the chaos. I picked it up one last time. I have one final announcement, I said. I looked at Penny. She looked up at me, her eyes clear and strong. She nodded. She knew what I was going to say. It was the only logical conclusion to the algorithm of our lives. You have spent years worrying about the purity of the Vanderbilt name, I said to the room. You worried that Penny would taint it with her silence. You worried that I wasn't good enough to carry it. I laughed. You don't have to worry anymore. I gripped the microphone tight. As of tonight, we are done. We are refusing the stipend. We are refusing the association. And we are refusing the name. I looked directly at Richard. My daughter is a genius, I said. She deserves a name that means something. She deserves a name that stands for integrity, for hard work, and for the truth. She will no longer be Penelope Vanderbilt. I took a breath, filling my lungs with the sweet, clean air of freedom. From this moment on, she is Penelope Hightower, my name, the name of the woman who believed in her when none of you did. I raised the microphone high in the air, like a gavel. We quit. And then, with a satisfying, heavy thud, I dropped the microphone onto the table, It hit the wood with a boom that signaled the end of an era. The feedback screeched for a split second, then cut out. I didn't look back. I took Penny's hand. Her grip was warm and firm. "Let's go home, silent coder," I whispered. "Let's go." "Mom," she typed on her tablet, flashing the screen at me with a small, secret smile. We walked toward the double doors. The crowd parted instantly, creating a wide avenue for us. No one tried to stop us. No one dared to speak. They simply watched us go. Two women in discount dresses walking out of a palace of lies, leaving the kings and queens to rot in the ruins of their own making. As we stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the stifling heat of the gala behind, I heard the first sounds of chaos erupting inside: shouting, accusations, the frantic ringtones of damage control. But out here, under the stars, it was quiet. "Did you hear that?" I asked Penny as we walked to our beat-up car. She looked at me, tilting her head. "The silence," I said. "It is beautiful." Penny smiled. She tapped her chest, right over her heart. "It is not silence," she signed. "It is peace." We got into the car. I started the engine, and as we drove away from the Vanderbilt estate for the last time, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing back there worth seeing. The future was sitting right next to me, glowing in the soft blue light of a tablet screen. The heavy oak doors of the Vanderbilt estate swung shut behind us, muting the cacophony of shouting voices and shattering reputations that we had left in the ballroom. The transition was jarring. One moment, we were in the center of a hurricane of our own making, surrounded by the heat of stage lights and the suffocating pressure of judgment. Next, we were standing in the cool, crisp air of a Boston spring night. The silence of the driveway was profound. It smelled of damp earth and pine needles. Cleansing the scent of expensive perfume and betrayal from my lungs, I looked down at Penny. She was still holding my hand, her grip loose and comfortable now. She took a deep breath, filling her chest, and then exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping 2 inches as the tension of the last 12 years finally left her body. She did not look like a girl who had just destroyed a dynasty. She looked like a girl who was ready to go home and put on her pajamas. The valet, a young man who looked thoroughly confused by the sudden exodus, jogged over with our car. My battered sedan looked comically out of place next to the line of Bentleys and Rolls-Royces. But as I took the keys, I felt a surge of affection for that old machine. It was the getaway car. It was the vessel that would carry us to freedom. "Thank you," I said to the valet, handing him a $20 bill. It was the last cash I had in my wallet, but I didn't care. We were just buckling our seatbelts when the front doors of the mansion burst open again. Richard and Eleanor Vanderbilt stumbled out onto the portico. They looked nothing like the regal patriarch and matriarch who had held court earlier. Richard's tie was undone, flapping in the wind. Eleanor had lost one of her earrings, and her immaculate hair was in disarray. They scanned the driveway frantically until their eyes locked on my car. They didn't walk. They ran. It was a desperate, undignified sprint that betrayed exactly how terrified they were of the future we had just rewritten. "Mildred." "Wait," Richard shouted, waving his arms. "Stop the car." I started the engine. It coughed to life with a rattle, a sound I usually apologized for. But tonight it sounded like music. Eleanor reached the driver's side window just as I put the car in reverse. She hammered on the glass with her manicured fist. Her face pressed against the pane, distorted and wild. "Mildred, please," she begged, her voice muffled by the glass. "We can fix this. We will rewrite the trust. We will give you 50% of the foundation. We can get Austin out of the picture entirely. Just do not leave with the patent. Do not take the money out of the family." I looked at her. I really looked at her. For years, I had craved a kind word from this woman. I had wanted her to see me as a daughter, to see Penny as a granddaughter. Now, I saw her for what she was: a parasite in silk. She didn't want us. She wanted the intellectual property. She wanted the $10 million and the prestige that came with it. "Penny!" Richard yelled from behind Eleanor, trying to see into the back seat. "Penny, darling, tell your mother to stop. Grandpa loves you. We can build you your own lab right here in the house." Penny didn't even turn her head. She had put her noise-canceling headphones back on. She was looking forward, through the windshield, watching the headlights cut through the darkness. She had tuned them out, literally and metaphorically. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't yell back. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a final argument. I simply looked Eleanor in the eye, raised my hand, and gave her a small, polite wave. It was the kind of wave you give to a stranger you are passing on the highway, a wave of total indifference. Then I shifted gears and pressed the gas. The car lurched forward. Eleanor had to jump back to avoid the tires. I watched in the rearview mirror as they stood there in the center of the driveway. Illuminated by the red glow of my taillights, they looked small. They looked shrinking. As we rounded the curve of the hedges, they disappeared into the darkness. Swallowed by the night and the ruins of their own arrogance, we drove in silence for a long time. It wasn't the heavy, anxious silence that usually filled our car after a family gathering. It was a companionable silence. It was the peace of soldiers returning from a war they had decisively won. 6 months is a long time in the world of technology, but it is an eternity in the world of scandal. The fall of the House of Vanderbilt was not swift. It was agonizingly slow and public. The morning after the gala, the story broke. Not the story Candace wanted, but the story we gave them. The headline in the Boston Globe read, "Vanderbilt fraud exposed, prodigy, expelled for cheating as silent cousin signs historic deal with MIT." The investors didn't just walk away. They ran. The future fund was audited by the IRS, triggered by the public revelation of the bribery Candace had used to cover up Austin's suspension. They found irregularities. They found that Candace had been using charitable donations to fund her wardrobe and her parties. Candace was ruined. Her social circle, the sharks she had swum with for years, turned on her with blood in the water. She was ostracized from every club, every board, and every gala in the city. Her husband, my brother-in-law, finally found his spine or perhaps just his desire for self-preservation and filed for divorce 3 months later, citing irreconcilable differences and the complete destruction of his professional reputation. Austin was pulled out of the Hawthorne Academy. The last I heard, he was in a boarding school in Switzerland, far away from the cameras, hopefully getting the therapy he needed to deprogram the narcissism his mother had instilled in him. I didn't hate the boy. I pitied him. He was a victim of expectations he could never meet, but I didn't spend much time thinking about them. I was too busy building a new life. We didn't buy a mansion. We bought a penthouse in Cambridge, overlooking the Charles River, just a 10-minute walk from the MIT campus. It was modern, open, and filled with light. We had soundproofing installed in every room, not to hide Penny, but to give her the absolute control over her environment that she craved. The living room was not centered around a television. It was centered around a workstation that looked like the command deck of a starship. This was Penny's domain. I stood in the kitchen, making tea in a pot that cost more than my old car. The morning sun was streaming in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I looked at the calendar. It was a Tuesday. Penny was at the lab. She wasn't a student in the traditional sense. She was a researcher. She spent her days with Dr. Rostova and a team of postgraduates who didn't care that she was 12 or that she didn't speak. They communicated in code, in equations, and in Slack messages. They judged her solely on the elegance of her output. For the first time in her life, Penny had friends. They were 25-year-old engineers with caffeine addictions. But they were her tribe. They respected her. They listened to her silence and heard the genius within it. My phone buzzed on the granite countertop. I picked it up. It was a message from Penny. She usually texted me around this time to let me know she was taking a break or to ask me to bring her lunch. I opened the message. There was no request for food. There was no update on the project. It was a photo. It was a selfie, taken in the reflection of a dark monitor screen. Penny was wearing a hoodie with the MIT logo. She was sitting next to Dr. Rostova, who was actually smiling. Penny wasn't smiling with her mouth, but her eyes were crinkled at the corners. She looked relaxed. She looked like she belonged. Below the photo was a text message. Mom, I just realized something today. I am presenting my paper on the neural grid next week. Doctor, Rostova says I am the lead author. The dots bubbled as she typed the next part. Thank you for never believing I was the dumb one. Thank you for listening when I wasn't speaking. You are the best code in my system. I stared at the screen. The tears came, but they weren't the hot, angry tears of the past. They were warm and cleansing. I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly. You were never dumb. Baby, the world was just too loud. We just turned down the volume so they could hear you. I put the phone down and looked out the window. Below me, the city of Boston was waking up. The trains were running. The lights were turning on. The grid was humming with the efficiency that my daughter had designed. Somewhere out there, the Vanderbilts were hiding in their shame, clinging to the wreckage of their past. But up here, the air was clear. I took a sip of my tea. It tasted like victory. We had won. Not just the money, and not just the fame. We had won the right to define ourselves. We had proven that silence is not an absence of thought. It is the loudest scream of intelligence, if you only have the patience to listen. So, to anyone out there who feels like they are shouting into a void, or to any parent holding the hand of a child who doesn't fit the mold the world has cast, do not let the noise drown you out. Do not let the Candaces of the world tell you what you are worth. Value is not found in the loudest voice in the room. It is found in the quietest mind that is busy changing the world while everyone else is just talking about it. My name is Mildred Hightower. My daughter is Penelope Hightower, and we have only just begun to speak. Thank you so much for listening to our story. It has been a journey of pain, revenge, and ultimate redemption, and I am so grateful to have shared it with you. If this story resonated with you, I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from, whether you are in your car, cooking dinner, or relaxing at home, and share your thoughts on Penny's victory. Did you ever have a moment where you had to prove everyone wrong? Let's talk about it. And please, do not forget to subscribe to the Sweet Rose Drama channel. Like this video, and hit that hype button. Your support helps stories like ours get heard by more people who might need a reminder that underdogs can bite back. Until next time, stay strong and keep writing your own ending.